Hello and welcome to another Every Tuesday tutorial. In this week's tutorial, we are going to be painting Leafy gouache letters. So gouache, if you've never used it before, is a pretty fantastic medium. And I want to walk you through the basics of it so you'll feel comfortable if you'd ever like to create anything with gouache in the future. So I'm going to give you my best tips, how to mix colors, the water ratio, and how it differs from watercolor. So what you see on screen is exactly what we're going to be creating together. You can create a single letter, you can create multiple letters. I made this for my dad for Father's Day coming up. You can use different shapes. Here's another example of a letter. And here's another example of a letter. So we're going to jump in and get started. I'm going to walk you through the supplies really quick and then we can start painting. So this is a black paper sketch pad by Arteza. This paper is kind of like construction paper, so just keep that in mind that since we are using water, it will wave a little bit depending on how much water you've mixed into your gouache. I'll also link to another black paper that's a little sturdier that you could also use. You can also just use plain watercolor paper since this is water-based paint. Watercolor paper is perfectly fine. It's typically the recommended material for gouache, but I love that gouache can be used on black paper versus white paper like watercolor where you're more limited. So that's why we're using black paper for this one. The paint palette I'm using is this porcelain one. I've switched to all porcelain palettes for all of my painting because they're very, very easy to clean. They're non-staining and the size of the paint trays are perfect for me. I'm also using just a plain cup of water with a pipette to add water to my gouache. I'm using these miniature brushes by Arteza. I love that there's so many different sizes right here that are all typically smaller than 0. So they're sized 1 and under and even go pretty far below 0. So for all these fine details that I love to paint and include, it's kind of like you're painting with a pen because they're so fine tipped. So I really love these. One of my favorite brushes is this 4/0 spot brush. So I love these paint brushes just because I have a lot more flexibility with the size and with these small details. So I'll be using this one and I'll also be using this number 1 just to pull my paint into my paint trays and mix them. All right, in order to transfer our letter onto the black paper, you'll need to print out your letter using your favorite font. You can use any font you'd like. This font is called Lulo Bold and you just want to make sure it's printed in black so we can trace it so we can transfer it onto our paper later. In order to transfer it, you'll need hard and soft pencils. You'll just need one hard and one soft. This is my favorite set of pencils, so I'll be using a 4B pencil and a 3H pencil, but really any B and any H will work fine for this. The gouache that I'm using is made by Arteza, so you can see these are the colors that we're going to be using really quick. I'm using bronze, gold, sage green, olive green, pearl aqua blue, and ice blue. It's pretty cool gouache. You can get some really beautiful metallics that also sit right on top of the paper and look beautiful on black. So for the gold, the bronze, and the pearl aqua blue, you'll see that happening. It's really, really pretty. These all came in this set of 60 gouache colors, this box. You can see there's a bunch of colors in here and there are so many different colors that you don't need to mix them if you don't like because you have that variety, but I'll also show you how to mix colors if that's something you'd like to do with these. All right, so that's a basic rundown of all of our supplies. If you click the link in the video description, you'll have access to all of the supplies. I've linked all of them right there. So anything that you'd like to pick up to follow along with, just click that link and you will have access to everything. So the first thing we want to do is transfer this letter onto our black paper and then we'll mix up our paints and we'll get started painting. Okay, like I mentioned before, we need to transfer our letter onto our black paper, so we're going to be using hard and soft pencils for that. So I'm going to grab my 4B and my 3H to do that. And what you want to do is grab your soft pencil first. Your soft pencil will always have a B on it. Your hard pencils will always have an H. And you're just going to flip the paper over and hopefully you can see the back part of your letter. If you can't, you can tape it onto a window and use that as a natural light box. I can see my lines pretty well, so I'm just going to go around and trace the outline of it on the back side of the letter. Okay, once you have your letter all traced, we're going to transfer it onto our black paper. So you're just going to lay it down, get your placement the way that you'd like it, and now you're just going to come around the letter. If you saw my tutorial on creating watercolor floral letters, then you already know this process. But in order to transfer it over, you're just going with your hard pencil right here, I've got the H right here, you're just going to scribble along the edge. And when you scribble along the edge, it will transfer the soft lead onto your paper, so then you'll have a perfect trace for all of your elements to follow. So if I move this paper, you can see it's transferring that graphite onto the black paper. So I'm just going to come around the letter and then I'll be right back. All right, so let's check our work. You want to make sure your hand stays on this paper when you check it so everything stays in position if you need to darken up any areas, but that looks good. So I'm going to set that aside. And now we can begin mixing our colors. So let's talk about the differences and similarities between gouache and watercolor. First of all, gouache is opaque, whereas watercolor is translucent. This means that watercolor uses more water when you're mixing in the paint than gouache does. Gouache also includes either white pigment or chalk within the tube, so it will dry opaque. And when it does dry, it has more of a matte finish. Because of that chalk content within the paint, you'll also notice that the colors dry slightly different than they look when they're wet. Another great feature of gouache that's similar to acrylics is it doesn't matter what order you paint your colors in. With watercolor, you're building color up, so you're always starting with your lightest colors first and you're building them to your darker and more richer colors. With gouache, you can paint your dark colors first if you'd like and paint white right on top of them. There's no masking that you need to worry about, where you would have to worry about that with watercolor. So since gouache is more opaque, we're going to be mixing far less water, so we're just going to start right there. But just keep those simple facts in mind. You're going to see how all of this works later on. The other really cool thing is gouache works on black, like we talked about earlier, where you can't do that with watercolor. So it's a pretty cool medium, but it's just as flexible as watercolor. If your paint dries in your palette and you'd like to use it a few days from now, you can re-wake it up by just adding a few drops of water. So pretty cool. All right, so when I'm pulling my paint, I do this very similar to watercolors. I grab one of my larger brushes, I just squeeze out a little bit and then I pull it with my brush. So I've got my gold right here and then I just put it in the paint palette. And I put about that much for each of my colors. So I'm just going to go around and fill up my paint tray with my little dabs of color right now. Okay, so I've got all of my paint in my tray right now, and now it's time to add the water in. So like I mentioned before, you only need to use a small amount of water. So for the little dabs of paint that I've done right here, I actually only put 1 drop of water into each of them, and that's perfectly enough for me. So the consistency that you're kind of looking for is wet house paint. You don't want it to seem like a paste, you want it to seem like a paint, but it's still going to be on the thicker side of paint than the really thin side like you get with watercolor. So I'm just going to drop 1 drop of water in each of these. All right, so I'm just going to come in here and mix up my gold, and you can see the more that I mix it, the thinner that it's getting. So that 1 drop really goes a long way. So that's the consistency that I'm looking for right there. And if you want to mix colors, you can either put 2 dabs of paint in the same paint tray and mix them together just like this, or once these are all mixed up, I'll show you another way of mixing colors together. So I'm going to go around and mix all these up. Okay, so I mentioned that I would show you another way to mix colors. So now that all these are mixed, I can also take one color like this green right here and put some paint right here, wash off my brush, and then grab a color that's already been mixed with water like this blue. Just grab a little on my brush and then mix it in together like that to get a new color. So that's another way that you can mix colors together. All right, so we are all set to go. We've got our paint prepared. I'm going to grab my very small 4/0 spot brush right here, and we're just going to get started. All right, so the way that I like to work is I like creating one doodle and covering all of my area or all of my letter all the way around, and then I'll add a new doodle and come around the perimeter of my letter again. And I'll keep creating new doodles in different colors until everything feels really full. I want the edges of my letters to be defined by those doodles. I don't want any hard edges at the end, because you're gonna see we're gonna erase these pencil marks at the end and all the doodles will naturally make those edges. So that is the main goal, is to just fill it up enough so all the edges are covered. So I'm going to start with this lighter blue color right here. And the first doodle I'm going to make is going to look kind of like this. I'm going to create a stem there and a stem here, and then put on some circular or oval leaves all the way down. And these are just doodles. I am not a realistic painter by any means, but the effect is really cool. And you can use these for wall art or stationery or greeting cards like I mentioned. And as you're coming around, so this is what this one looks like. I will change it up so they don't look totally the same. You want it to be different enough so it still feels organic. So I'll have a stem that looks like that, and maybe I'll have a third one right here just to change it up and make it seem more organic as it goes around. So I'm going to complete painting this doodle all the way around the letter, and then I'll be back. Okay, so another really cool thing about gouache is because it's got such a small amount of water added to it, it dries pretty quickly. So with watercolor, you're always aware of where your hand is because you don't want to smudge anything. With gouache, it dries a lot faster. So yes, you still want to be aware of where your hand is so you don't smudge anything, but it does dry a lot quicker. So you're able to put your hand in places that you wouldn't have been able to with watercolor. All right, so we're on to our next doodle. The next doodle, we're going to use this darker green color, or olive green. And let me grab a little paint and I'll show you what that doodle looks like. So for this one, we're just going to create one stem, and it's going to have oval leaves that are pointy at both ends, and they're going to be kind of symmetrical on each side, so they're going to match up exactly, whereas the other doodle, they were a little more sporadic. So that's what this one looks like. So I'm going to vary the size of these, but I'm going to keep them one stem wherever I put them. Okay, so we're all set with that one, and now we're going to move on to our lighter green color. And for this doodle, we're going to kind of begin intertwining some of these elements now that we have them both down, and that will really add to the more natural look of them. So what you're going to do is just come up with one of your stems. So I'm going to just have this one pass through here and then create another stem off of it, and then I'm just going to create those round leaves. But I'm just going to put two around the top one up at the top of the stem, and just put these all around your letter. All right, so now we're going to introduce some branches, and we're going to use our bronze color for that. So I've got my bronze right here, and just like we did before with intertwining elements, we're going to do the same thing. So I'm going to come up, and these are just going to be branches. So every which way, don't worry about what they look like, as long as they kind of stem off of each other. The eye will always read it as a branch. Okay, so now with our branches in there, you can see it's really starting to show through that letter with all the edges that we built up. So the next thing we're going to do is just drop in some decorative elements. So I like making these kind of look like teardrops, and I'm going to be using this darker blue right here. And wherever there's some white space or it looks like the area could use a little something extra, that's where you want to drop these in. So these are going to look kind of like this, and they're going to go off kind of in different directions, so it feels really dynamic. and just adds a little extra energy to everything. Okay, so if you accidentally smudge some of your color, even if you're being really careful, like I thought I was being, you can see this little smudge area right here. If you come in with just a little bit of water, sometimes you can wipe it away. So I'm just going to kind of smudge it away like that. And at least then it won't be so obvious that it's right in the letter. There we go. And I think these are smudges too. We'll try and get rid of those. That's a little better. Okay, so the next thing and the last thing that we're going to do is drop in some gold elements. So any extra little white spaces that you feel like needs something in there to bring it all to life, we're going to add little pops of gold. So I'm just going to make little circles with my gold. So it's just the final finishing little touch. So I'm just going to put little dots around. And since these are metallic, they'll really pop and look really pretty. Okay, and once your gold is on there, that is all done. All right, so now what you want to do is just let it completely dry because we're going to come in with our eraser and erase away all the pencil marks. So I like using this click eraser. This is my favorite eraser because I can use it like a pen or a pencil. And it's really easy to get into these tighter areas and really scrub away any pencil marks that I have. So I'm going to let this totally dry and then I'll be right back and just erase everything away. Okay, so that is how to paint a leafy gouache letter. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please subscribe and don't forget to head on over to my site, every-tuesday.com, for even more design and lettering and painting tutorials and freebies. And once again, the link to all the supplies mentioned in this video are right in the video description, so just tap on that link and you'll have access to everything. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you next time.